Hola, soy Francisco Albarello, profesor de la Facultad de Comunicación de la Universidad Austral. El 7 de mayo pasado tuvimos la visita de Henry Jenkins, quien dio una clase especial dedicada a los alumnos de grado de la Facultad de Comunicación. En esta clase que le presentamos, Jenkins responde en primer lugar a la polémica desatada por las declaraciones del director de cine estadounidense Martin Scorsese cuando dijo que las películas de Avengers de Marvel eran un parque de diversiones y cuestionaba la experiencia de las audiencias. Jenkins responde a estas críticas analizando en profundidad la naturaleza de la participación de los fans en las narrativas transmedia. En segundo lugar, Jenkins se dedica en esta clase a actualizar el concepto de narrativa transmedia que quedó acuñado en su libro que tuvo mucha circulación en estas latitudes, La cultura de la convergencia. Y se refiere especialmente al remix y dice que el remix, si bien forma parte del mundo narrativo, no llega a tener continuidad con ese mundo narrativo por la diversidad, la multiplicidad de direcciones que toman las historias. Y en tercer lugar, Jenkins en esta clase nos trae algo novedoso que es el concepto de imaginación cívica. La imaginación cívica, según Jenkins, permite cambiar el mundo, permite lograr un mundo mejor. ¿Cómo? A través de la incorporación de héroes y personajes de las narrativas y la actividad de los activistas sociales juveniles que introducen esos personajes a sus causas, dándole visibilidad, como por ejemplo la lucha contra la xenofobia, el racismo, etc. Espero que disfruten tanto como nosotros de esta clase. Que la fuerza los acompañe.
It is a great pleasure to see you again and to have a chance to speak to this class. I am sorry not to be in Argentina to be with you directly. I had a wonderful trip there about 6 or 7 years ago and enjoyed listening to tango music and eating really good beef and exploring Buenos Aires. We even saw a gaucho in one of the markets. So I had a great experience, and I hope to get back there sometime soon when the world opens up again. But Zoom may be the second best thing for us to be able to communicate with each other. So what I'm going to try to do is a little bit of Henry's greatest hits. I'm going to update some of the ideas that you may have been reading this semester, including the pieces that I sent in preparation for today. Just going to deal with some contemporary headlines through the lens of the vocabulary I've been introducing for thinking about media change. And I'm going to begin with the controversy that erupted late last year when Martin Scorsese, the American filmmaker known for Goodfellas and Taxi Driver and so forth, attacked the Marvel Cinematic Universe, saying that he did not think it was actually cinema, that it was simply an amusement park attraction. And I want to look at that as a moment of controversy about how are stories told today, and what are the expectations across generation in terms of what a story might be. To some degree, this was a marketing move by Scorsese, who was trying to get his film, The Irishman, visible, trying to get Academy Award voters attentive to it, which was partially successful. He got an Academy Award nomination as Best Picture, but of the top 10 Best Picture nominees this year, Irishman was the only one to receive no awards whatsoever. So the outcome was a little mixed as Hollywood responded to this attack on one of its largest cash cows. So at part, what's at stake here is the tension between two notions of what it is to be a cineast, a film fan. And on one notion, the fan is invested in individual films, often on the basis of their director, scanning across film history, but with an eye towards certain genres and excluding other genres. And very clearly, the superhero story is one of the things that's excluded. On the other side are the contemporary media fans, and I use the word media as opposed to film because their attachment are to stories that span media, that spread across many different media platforms. And here I have an image from San Diego Comic-Con, which I'll talk a little bit about later, but which is sort of the center of gravity for this new media culture, this transmedia culture that draws so many fans together. And the difference between the woman shown contemplating which individual film to watch on her laptop and the collective gathering of these fans in costume in San Diego to celebrate their passion for Marvel sets up some difference in between what it means to be a film fan for these two generations. If we go in this next slide, we see a poster for Ride Lonesome, which is one of the many classic 1950s Westerns that Scorsese is a particular fan of. And it's a film known for its director, Bud Buddicker. It's a story that we see the basic elements of. It's a Western. It has a lone hero. It has the woman, the gun, the handcuffs. You know, there we see a very linear story suggested there in a classic Hollywood style. Next to it, we have Avengers Endgame, which has more than 20 main characters that we've gotten to know over almost 30 films, leave aside whatever familiarity we may have with the comic books. And this is the culmination, the final chapter of that huge mass of buildup of story, where every moment involves multiple characters, multiple character issues. It is no longer a simple linear experience. It's no longer about the lone protagonist, the man, the woman, the bad guy, and the resolution. It is very much about a kind of parallel paths for many characters who crisscross each other in a complex set of ways. And we can think about a moment like the great one near the end of the film where all the female superheroes are brought together in a single shot. The excitement that yields in the cinema is a very different kind of excitement, say, than when the sheriff shoots down the bad guy at the end of Ride Lonesome. So when Scorsese attacks these films, he says that they don't have any human connection, that they don't deal with characters and emotions. And here I have an image of Ms. Marvel from the comics, who is a superhero fan and writes fan fiction about her favorite Marvel superheroes. And I would say that fan fiction is a powerful illustration of the human attachments, the emotional engagement that spectators feel with these new stories. They may not be complete on the screen. They may anticipate a fan community that pulls the pieces together, that compares notes, that writes stories, but the human attachment is very much still what drives our experience of these films. But human attachment is built up through multiple encounters with these characters and not within a single film text. Finally, he says, compares it to an amusement park because it's all about immersion and not about narrative. And I wanted to include here the poster for It Came from Outer Space, another film from the 1950s, because it suggests to us that in fact immersion has always been part of the experience of cinema, one pleasure among many, but that immersion is carried to new levels today through literally amusement parks. This is the Avenger campus, which is under construction or was under construction till COVID halted construction on it temporarily, but will be a new amusement park attraction literally brought out of. So if we think back across film history, we realize that transmedia itself is not new, but kinds of transmedia come and go. So when I was in Argentina, I discovered the work of Carlos Gardel, the tango performer. And I learned a bit about his career, the way in which he was both a recording artist, a live performer, appeared on stage, appeared in movies, more recently has appeared on murals, and I saw several murals in his honor walking around Buenos Aires, has now appeared on postage stamps. That Gardel was, like the Hollywood stars of the same era, someone who in fact appeared across multiple media platforms, that we got to know who he was, his strengths, his personality, his persona across those various platforms, and his image persists in the culture, in people's memories, because of that reinforcement of his personality across those media platforms. The stories were not necessarily connected across those platforms, but the personality of these Hollywood stars were. So Hollywood, our cinema, popular cinema around the world, has always been, in some ways, existing between multiple media platforms that shape the experience of spectators. So what is different about stories at the current moment? When I was doing my book, Convergence Culture, I sat down with a veteran Hollywood screenwriter, and he said that when he first got in the industry, you pitched a story because you had to have a great story in order to make a great movie. And in this case, what we see is Casablanca, which is, to my mind, a great movie, because in part it has a very compelling story that begins and ends within the 90 minutes or whatever the running time of that film is. He said, then we pitched a character because you needed a great character in order to create sequels. And here I have Freddy Krueger from the Nightmare on Elm Street films. In my eyes, he's a great character. I enjoyed many of these films. And he sustained Hollywood production for an extended period of time because people kept coming back to see what Freddy Krueger was up to in this next film. He says, now I pitch a world because a world can support multiple stories involving multiple characters across multiple platforms. And we can conceive of Star Wars in multiple ways. One is the Luke Skywalker saga, which unfolds over 9 movies in the end, more if we count Solo and Rogue One, but in any case, the core saga that involves the Skywalkers is 9 films. Here, though, Star Wars is represented as a world, right, with all kinds of moving parts, all kinds of corners of the universe, which don't necessarily involve Luke Skywalker. And that world of Star Wars spreads out across many different media, many different contexts, games, comics, novels, toys, animated series, television series, all become part of the world of Star Wars, only some of which involve telling the story of Anakin and Luke Skywalker. So here we see one of the Skywalker films. This is Force Awakens. We know how to situate that into the Skywalker saga. But if we look at Rogue One, it requires a lot more explanation, right? It would be technically Star Wars 3.5, right? It comes between the end of the prequels, before A New Hope, which was the original Star Wars film. It exists with characters that don't exist in any of those films, but in some ways their actions touch a plot point that extends into the Star Wars New Hope. There's a complex relationship of that film text compared to sequels and prequels that we're used to seeing coming out of the entertainment super system in the past. And that tells us that how we think about stories is getting more complicated, maybe more complicated than Martin Scorsese's kept up with. And that may be part of the reason he was so anti-Marvel in his comments in the fall. But it's also not just a world in the sense that there's a fictional world at play. Oh, before I get there. So this is to illustrate an important point. Star Wars is a key text for us thinking about this new system of entertainment, because when George Lucas signed his contract to direct the original Star Wars film, his deal was that he took very little money directing the movie, that he was taking most of his money on the back end for, at the time was called ancillary products. So he got almost nothing from the original film itself. He got most of his money from action figures and comic books and all of the other things that grew up around Star Wars. And that meant that Lucas had an incentive to lay the foundation for those elements in the films as he made them. And that meant the films were already from the very beginning understood to be part of the system, this world system that extends multiple characters, multiple stories across multiple media platforms. And that becomes an important part of how Star Wars emerges as a film. Now, something interesting happens is we trace Star Wars distribution around the world, which is the number of media platforms further expand in unauthorized uses of Star Wars property. So here, for example, we see shadow puppets from Malaysia performing the Star Wars stories. And if you look closely, there's Princess Leia, there's Darth Vader, there are two stormtroopers there. They're performing Star Wars in this very traditional Malaysian, Indonesian style of theatrical performance. And this is the way that that culture has begun to customize Star Wars to reflect the storytelling systems there. If we look around the world, we see in Russia, for example, Star Wars nesting dolls, right? A very traditional form of craft cultural expression in Russia. If we look in Mexico, we see piñatas in the figure of Star Wars characters. And here in Los Angeles, I have to go only a matter of a handful of blocks before I can see those piñatas for sale in the marketplaces here in Los Angeles as well, because of our large Mexican population here. This is sand sculpture in Rio de Janeiro. Some sand sculpture is an important Brazilian tradition of representing the world. These are young American Muslim girls wearing hijab that look like characters from Star Wars, right? So this is part of the ways that the Muslim world incorporated the iconography of Star Wars into its own cultural practice. And this is the work of a Navajo artist who draws Yoda as a traditional tribal shaman. Again, a customization, a localization of Star Wars. So as we look at Star Wars in these various contexts, we can see the different storytelling systems at play in these different cultures around the world, and the potential to further expand the range of media platforms something like Star Wars is told through. But media platforms aren't just contemporary mass media platforms or digital platforms, but they include all of these traditional practices that take place as local audiences customize Star Wars to suit their own needs. Something similar is happening on, with the fan communities anywhere we look at the world. So here is the character that has become known as Baby Yoda. And Baby Yoda was an automatic success when The Mandalorian launched in December on Disney+. He did not have a name at that point. He very clearly is not a younger version of Yoda, although he comes from the same race as Yoda. The time frame doesn't work out for him to literally be Baby Yoda. The official Disney line is that he is not Baby Yoda, but the fan community identified these images, named him, started building a mythology around him, and as importantly, began to incorporate them into their memes, to tell different stories through the figure of Baby Yoda, and build their own products. Because in order to keep the character's existence secret, Disney didn't make any Baby Yoda toys, and so there were no Baby Yoda toys out for Christmas. So eBay became the place you could go to buy Baby Yoda materials. And once the Christmas season was over and Disney began to introduce their own Baby Yoda materials, they started sending out legal notices to these fans saying, you can't call that Baby Yoda. So he's now known as Green Alien Child. But Green Alien Child, have no confusion, is still Baby Yoda. But so this is a kind of process of localization as well, that fan communities identify things that interest them in film text. They begin to perform them, to retell them, to remix them, to remake them in their own image, and they pull them in directions that reflect their interest and not simply those of the companies that produce them. Disney, which owns Star Wars, was one of the first studios to really recognize the power of that fan audience. This is a picture from the early 1930s one of the original Mickey Mouse clubs. And if you look closely, all of those people are wearing Mickey Mouse mask. And Disney across the US organized Saturday matinees where people came and celebrated Mickey Mouse. They watched Mickey Mouse cartoons, they sang songs, they did crafts. They were there to become a fan base for Mickey Mouse, which at his peak was the most popular film star in the United States. In part because Disney recognized the value of allowing people to have a deeper investment in its character. We can go from there to San Diego. San Diego Comic-Con won't take place this summer, alas, but when I go, there is about 150,000 fans gathered in one location, taking over more or less the downtown of San Diego, sort of occupying the city, dominating the city's landscape. And the events spill out from the convention center, which is itself massive, into these pop-up things all over the downtown San Diego. And these fans who have access to social media have become central to the marketing campaigns for these Hollywood films. And that's one important function that San Diego plays, is this is where Hollywood courts its audience, where it presents its hottest new properties for our approval and our help in promoting it through social media. But the other thing is because it's the one convention a year that brings together folks from the games industry, the comics industry, television, film, it's where deals get made that drive transmedia production down to outward across the platforms. Creative artists meet each other, studio executives meet each other, and that's where the decisions start to get made that are help to account for the bringing together of these various entertainment sectors to form one large entertainment super system. So I got, one of the things we've started to see is the degree to which fans online are processing and demanding more complex information than people did before. I got interested in this issue when I started exploring Twin Peaks online at the beginning of the internet era. And I was finding that the critics on newspapers were saying the Twin Peaks had become so complicated that no one understood what was happening anymore. And the fans online were complaining the Twin Peaks had become so simple it wasn't interesting anymore. So there's a sense that when you put massive number of people together online with different expertise, each tracking down bits of information, they need more information to keep them engaged. They need more complexity. And we're seeing over time, stories become more complicated, require more secondary characters, more elements of the world, more dense mise-en-scène than we've seen from previous entertainment. And that's in part to fuel this massive fan community that wants more of the shows that it's interested in, that's scanning the horizon, looking for stories that matter to them. And when they find one, they want to drill down deep and discover as much as they can. But beware of this new socially connected audience that when you anger them, when you don't deliver the goods, when you tell a story that doesn't add up and doesn't come together in an end, having raised their expectations, they're going to push back. And I've been asked a lot by reporters about fan privilege because Game of Thrones fans say we're really angry over the ending of the story. And I don't see that as fan privilege. I see that as the failure of storytellers to do their job. I think Game of Thrones producers failed to deliver to the audience what they promised. And any consumer has the right to be upset when they're given shoddy merchandise, as I think the last episodes of Game of Thrones were. So as we move to this new complexity, we start to see systems that are ever more elaborate. So this is some of the characters from Pokemon. An American educator, James Paul G, says the Pokemon system is more complex than the periodic table. There are more different elements. Those elements have more different states. Those elements have more different points of conflict and bonds with each other than would be true of the actual periodic table. And yet we never say to a kid, you're just not bright enough to understand Pokemon. That Pokemon has been open to all, and it depends on all fans knowing some part of that system and sharing what they know with each other, and what Mimi Ito calls hypersociality. But it's an example of this world making that's ever more complicated. So here, for example, these are the characters of the X-Men comics, which maybe explains why I never understand what's going on in X-Men comics, because I haven't read them systematically through the years. But you see just the complex set of relationships in that system. By comparison, this is a set of characters and relationships in Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace, which when I was growing up was considered to be a really difficult book because of the complex set of character relations, and today seems relatively simple. I mean, its depth comes on other levels. I'm not knocking War and Peace, it's my favorite book, but the character relationships that we had to constantly consult the chart in the back of the book are not where the complexity lies, compared to modern pop culture worlds, which demand a lot more knowledge and a lot more expertise from their fans than I think most casual viewers assume. And this may also account for why Martin Scorsese didn't understand the depth, the emotional depth of the character relations in the Avengers films. And here we see the houses from Game of Thrones, each of whom has their own characters attached to it, many characters attached to each of those houses. And those houses then become a point of affiliation, identification. We pick our favorite houses, you know, as we did with Harry Potter. Game of Thrones fans pick their favorite houses that they claim alliance with, maybe develop expertise over the characters of those houses, so forth. And that becomes part of how we engage with these more complex worlds, and how emotional attachments with the characters, how affiliations with other fans build up through this process of world building. So all of this falls under the territory of what I call transmedia. And in my book, Convergence Culture, I use the example of the Matrix to talk about transmedia. That when the first Matrix film was produced, the Wachowskis sat down and mapped an elaborate set of plans for the future of the story, which involved comics, anime, games, as well as 2 more feature films. Each of those are released in tight relationship to each other. And in that chapter, I trace some of the ideas, stories, situations that flow from one to the other, characters that are built up, say, in games that are played out on film, missions that are set up in films that are played out in the anime, backstory in the anime. We need to understand what happens in the films. This is what we call transmedia. And here's my definition of transmedia. It represents a process where integral elements of a fiction get dispersed systematically across multiple delivery channels for the purpose of creating a unified and coordinated entertainment experience. Ideally, each medium makes its own unique contribution to the unfolding of the story. So each part of that is important. The key elements of the fiction are dispersed. So I've sort of flagged here the words that I think are most important, all of which have been dissected and debated by 20 years now of other scholars looking at this definition, nuancing it. Today, I would say a key word there is storytelling, in that transmedia by itself simply refers to the systematic relations across media channels. And if we go back to Carlos Gardel, that's transmedia performance, right? His performances spread across media, his stories do not. If we look at Bugs Bunny, that's a transmedia character, in that the character appears in many movies, but the characters don't remember what happens from one episode to the next. They have amnesia. You know, if we think, so we could look at different things that might spread across media. But what this is describing is storytelling. The second modification we'd make today is idea of unified and coordinated entertainment experiences. Because we're seeing, as these systems expand, that there is often a space to explore other possibilities. There are sub corners of that universe which aren't meant to connect up with everything else. right? That are where a particular filmmaker tells their version. So if you saw the Watchmen series this fall, there's some ways in which that series is meant to connect with Alan Moore's comic book, and some ways in which it is, as the film, as Damon Lindelof said, it's a remix of that comic book. It's a retelling, recombination of themes, ideas from that comic into a television show that is meant to stand alone, but can be read in relation to the earlier comic. And if seeing this in terms of multiplicity rather than simply continuity opens up the space for us to think about how does fan fiction, fan creativity relate to transmedia? What happens to all those Harry Potter fan fiction stories? Is that part of the transmedia system of Harry Potter or not? And more theorists are arguing that it is, that it's insofar as it's part of the experience we have of this Harry Potter story world, it is part of transmedia for Harry Potter. It is not necessarily part of the continuity of Harry Potter, right? We don't necessarily assume all of those stories are true, that this is what really happened. It's canon, not canon, but it is part of the overall logic, the transmedia experience of Harry Potter, that these stories exist. So remix becomes part of this transmedia system, but not part of the continuity. And I think that's a shift in how we think about this. So as we go back again to the system of Marvel, we have a world populated with so many different characters who are being gradually tapped by a range of other media, including film, including television, including games, including other media, that take some pieces from that world and then draw them into their own system. And in that sense, we can say Marvel is a transmedia system, even though there's not a direct one-to-one continuity from the Marvel comic books to the Marvel films. The Marvel films are connected to each other. They build on characters from the comic books. They may even redo plots from the comic books, but you can't simply read the comics and the Marvel films in relation to each other. You can't simply watch the Netflix version of the Marvel universe and read it on top of the film version of the Marvel universe, yet they're all part of a transmedia system we might call the Marvel Extended Universe. Now, this universe has become so valuable that it affects the structure of Hollywood itself. So Disney bought 20th Century Fox because 20th Century Fox owned and controlled the rights to the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, a range of other Marvel characters, Spider-Man, and it wanted to reunite the Marvel Cinematic Universe on screen and fully control Marvel. And this was a driver of the deal that Disney recently cut to acquire Fox. That we've seen huge studio realignments brought about by the economic logic of this transmedia system that we're talking about. All right, so I'm going to close by talking a little bit about this idea of civic imagination, which is in the things I asked you to look at for today. And it's an idea we've been developing over time. So what is the political effect of these stories? How are we drawing on stories in order to shape our politics in the contemporary world? I first started getting interested in this when I noticed pop culture iconography cropping up at protests. And here we see the Guy Fawkes mask, which has become a staple of protest around the world in recent years, starting maybe with the Anonymous movement and with the Occupy movements and spreading outward from this. So here we see the Guy Fawkes mask used in the Occupy movement. Now, the Guy Fawkes mask has a long history of political resistance in Great Britain. It is a folk hero. It is an icon of politics in Great Britain going back hundreds of years. But in the US, it was introduced by V for Vendetta, the Alan Moore graphic novel, the film version of that graphic novel. And in the United States, Warner Brothers, which produce both, in fact, control all rights to the Guy Fawkes mask. So ironically, when Occupy protesters go after multinational corporations by wearing Guy Fawkes masks, they in fact have to pay for the privilege to a multinational media conglomerate, Warner's Communication, before they can do so. So there's something curious going on around the idea that we're taking copyrighted iconography and pulling it into a protest that may in fact be directed against the various forces that created that iconography to begin with. But that's not the only place we're seeing this take place. So these are protesters, Palestinian protesters in the occupied territory in the Middle East, who marched along the border between Israeli-controlled territory and Palestinian occupied territory, dressed like the Na'vi from James Cameron's Avatar, and chanting, "Sky people, you can't take our land." And this became a way for them to globally dramatize their struggles. These photographs, the videos of them spread around the planet in a way that many people were not that conscious of the politics of the Middle East, became aware of it through their use of popular culture iconography for political protest. Or here we see another Occupy meme, Occupy Sesame Street. 99% of the world's cookies are consumed by 1% of the monsters. And it's one of the hundreds of different memes out there that borrow popular culture in order to call attention to the cause of Occupy. So as we started looking at that phenomenon, and it's just grown since we first became aware of it, we're seeing it globally. I was in Chile maybe 6-7 years ago, and I saw these guys walking through the streets dressed like zombies. And I'd heard about the zombie protests across Latin America. So I walked up to these people and asked what was going on and what they were protesting. He said, "No, we're promoting the relaunch of Walking Dead, which is going to start next week." So I was having trouble telling the difference between zombie protesters and Walking Dead promoters, because the same iconography again was being used by both. And the line between fan, promoter, protester increasingly blurs as we look at it. So as we were looking at that, we got interested in the graduation speech that J.K. Rowling, author of Harry Potter, made at Harvard about a decade ago. And she talks about imagination in relation to civics, right? And she was part of Amnesty International before she left her job to write the books. She was a human rights advocate for a long time and still is. And so here she says, imagination is not only the unique human capacity to envision that which is not, and therefore the fount of all invention and innovation. In its arguably most transformative and revelatory capacity, it is the power that enables us to empathize with humans whose experiences we have never shared. We do not need magic to change the world. We carry all the power we need inside ourselves already. We have the power to imagine better. And we can think about imagine better in two senses. First is we can imagine a better world. We can imagine a world that's more equitable, that respects human rights, that has empathy, that cares about the experiences of others, and we can do a better job of imagining. And for Rowling, this is a civic project. It's a project. By civics, I mean those things that connect us together as citizens, rather than those things that connect us to our government. The obligations, cultural, social obligations we have to each other, as opposed to the politics, which often divides us and has to do with the distribution of power between citizens and government. But the civic imagination is that which helps us to imagine a better world, to imagine ourselves as people capable of making change, to imagine a mechanism by which we might change our world, to imagine the connections we have with other citizens within our community, to have empathy for people whose experiences are different from our own, and for those most oppressed and marginalized people on the planet. The civic imagination is that which allows us to imagine freedom, justice, equality before we directly experience them. And put those together, we have the tools for social change that come through this notion of the imagination. And so what we're seeing around the world is that metaphors from popular culture are being drawn upon by young activists in order to form a new vernacular for social change. If you go to Hong Kong, the students in the streets of Hong Kong are singing a song from Les Mis, the Broadway musical, which is about, can you hear the people singing? It's about popular uprising. It's a song about democracy. And it's through Les Mis that they can imagine the power for social change driven from the streets. You know, and we'll look at some more examples here. In the United States, around immigration politics, we've seen the dreamers, the young Americans who came from elsewhere at young age who are fighting for citizenship rights in the United States. They're using the story of Superman to tell their story. Because they would say there are no illegal aliens, there are undocumented peoples. But if there were an illegal alien, it might be Kal-El from the planet Krypton. That Kal-El's parents send him away from his home, his mother culture, in search of a better life someplace else. He crosses the border in the middle of the night, lands in the cornfields of Kansas, gets adopted by an Anglo couple that teaches him to hide who he is and where he came from. He goes out and fights, nevertheless, for truth, justice, and the American way of life, wearing his ethnic clothes, because the Superman costume is made from the blankets his mother wrapped him in when they sent him away from the dying world of Krypton to come to Earth. So put it together, and it's a pretty powerful way of telling their stories, right? How do you tell the story of being undocumented in the United States? They would say Superman is undocumented. There's no place in the comics where we see him legally cross in the United States and get a green card and start to work. He is someone who is there as a refugee. And that story allows them to explain to people their story, their journey, their struggle for citizenship and acceptance in the American context. Well, we can also see iconography of resistance in other forms, right? After the Birdman movie came out, people posted this meme of Birdman slapping Trump, right? And we've seen since then Trump represented as various versions of the Joker, sort of as the arch villain affecting American politics. So it's not simply looking for a better world. We can also express our opposition to other forces by how we visualize them, how we visualize ourselves in relation to them. So as the superhero iconography is everywhere in American political culture at the current time. Here is about the taking down of the Confederate flag in South Carolina. Here is a equal justice for LGBT people drawn in superhero iconography. This is a feminist iconography that sort of goes after body shaming and celebrates the diversity of women's body through the figure of Wonder Woman. Right after Black Panther came out, we tracked several political movements that used Black Panther for their organizing. Define American, which is an immigrant rights organization, developed study kits on borders, refugees, exiles, walls in relation to Black Panther. And Black Lives Matters ran voter registration drives in Black communities outside screenings of Black Panther, talking about Wakanda the vote. So these are activists who surround a pop culture story that's important, that's urgent, that people are caring about, and use it as a way to get discussions going about larger issues within the society. So as we think about our current moment, we've been tracking the range of images around the COVID pandemic and the superhero character. This is one of many that use the notion of masks, which come a central trope of the superhero genre, to think about medical workers. Here's another one that's an official one from one of the healthcare services. But superheroes wear masks, let's make sure they have them. Here's an appreciation card someone sent to a healthcare worker that has Spider-Man as alongside this drawing of the healthcare worker that helped him. Here are some editorial cartoons that show Superman racing to the emergency room. Or this one where he rips the cape and badge off his chest to give to the medical worker. Or this one where the superheroes have gathered to pay tribute to grocery workers who are selling food to people at the risk of their own health, saying, you too are heroes, you belong to our club. And here's people in the streets dressed like superheroes, telling people to stay at home to avoid the epidemic. I was walking my dog this morning and saw a new mural on the street across from mine that has Batman sweeping the streets, saying, you know, that the people who sweep the streets and keep the city clean during the shutdown are also superheroes who are helping the society. So all of the ideas of the superhero are being mobilized right now to celebrate those groups in our society which are serving us at the risk of their own lives and keeping us safe, keeping us healthy during this pandemic shutdown. I asked one of my students who's from Argentina to see if she could find me how some of the memes circulating here are there in relation to the pandemic. And I grabbed a few that I noticed on that she shared with me that represent different mobilizations of popular culture to foster a civic imagination around COVID. You know, how are we representing this? How are the various themes being played out? I don't have the knowledge of Argentinian culture to be able to fully read what's been mapped onto these pop culture icons. The ones I recognize are obviously the ones that represent American or British popular culture, but there were some that I didn't recognize, which suggest local pop culture being mobilized. What we're seeing there as here, this attempt to represent the civic through images drawn from popular vernacular. We also talked, she and I also talked about the rituals that are growing up civically. So this is a picture of me on my balcony in downtown Los Angeles, hitting a pot with a wooden spoon at our 8 p.m. celebration of healthcare workers. This is taking place all over the world in various combinations, but the video she shared with me from Argentina show lots more music taking place in Argentina, at least in the video she shared. Here, we're mostly shouting, flicking lights, beating pots and pans. My dog comes and gets my son and I every time it starts and drags us out there. She seems to recognize that this is something important that humans do, and we theorize she thinks we're howling, because it is a kind of collective howling that's taking place. But it is a new ritual that has emerged almost spontaneously that allows us to feel connections to each other in our isolation, and allows us to celebrate the role of the medical community, in particular, this role of the civic community in protecting its members, ensuring that we, as many of us as possible, survive this thing. So the Civic Imagination Project has launched this Instagram social media campaign that get people to take photographs out their window, share what they're seeing and what they're feeling during this, and share it under our hashtag. So I thought I would end just by announcing that it's one of the activities we're doing as we're researching the civic imagination, and we're trying to collect pictures, stories, sentiments from all over the world that might help us to better understand how people in different places are imagining not only the virus, but also the way citizens, the state, have responded to the crisis, and whether they feel more secure, less secure in response to it. So hopefully I've allowed us a little time for questions and answers. I'm eager to talk with you and see what things you're thinking about. But I hope that gives you a little more up-to-date sense of some of the ideas that you may have encountered reading some of my work this semester, and some of the ideas and how they might relate to the current moment that we're involved with.